Let's talk about China. So while you were all distracted and while we are all distracted with the banks collapsing, the United States is moving closer to a war with China this evening. Over the past few days, the United States has ramped up its rhetoric and war footing with China, moving huge amounts of ships and weapons towards China in fleet. They're moving a fleet there, which is great news. They delivered brand new nuclear submarines as part of this deal with Australia. That's about to happen. And members of U.S. Congress are openly talking about war with China. And for the first time that I can remember, China is openly talking about the U.S. provoking a war with China, which China never talks about this. They never open their mouths about this. They stay quiet, but not now, as Arnaud Bertrand points out from this Wall Street Journal piece. This is exactly what Xi Jinping had said. And Arnaud says, to my knowledge, this is an unprecedented statement by Xi. So here's what Xi Jinping just said. Western countries led by the United States have implemented all-round containment, encirclement, and suppression against us, bringing unprecedentedly severe challenges to our country's development. And as Caitlin Johnstone reports this morning in a great piece, she has a piece up called "The Drums of War with China Are Beating Much Louder Now." And she really lays out what's happening. And she says, quote, "Comments from both Washington and Beijing have suddenly become much more pointed and aggressive in recent days, with talk about hot war now being discussed as not just a real possibility, but in many cases a probability." So that's good.
What's a hot war as opposed to a cold war?
Well, actual missiles are fired rather than the talk of missiles being fired, like a Cold War. Members of the U.S. Congress are openly saying that we are now at war with China. Oh, yes. So I don't know if you know that, but according to our members of Congress who just got back from Taiwan, we are at war with China, so we better get prepared. Here's Representative Tony Gonzalez, who just returned from Taiwan, where we just sent a whole bunch of weapons. Watch.
My first question is for you, General. I just got back from a trip from Taiwan. It's the second trip to Taiwan in the past 14 months. I spent 20 years in the military, as my good friend August Pfluger pointed out, our chairman pointed out. I know what war looks like. We're at war. I mean, this is a war. Maybe a Cold War, but this is a war with China. With the People's Republic of China, every single day are invading Taiwan via their cyberspace. Not only that, but the question I have for you is, in particular, your expertise is in air. I spent 5 years as an air crewman flying against China. I know exactly when they come out and they intercept our aircrafts.
Yeah, so he goes on. So I don't know, did you guys vote for war with China? Because I sure as hell didn't. Do these people even understand what they're saying? The deep state is actively pushing for war with China as the U.S. dollar continues its downward spiral. Here's Representative Chris Stewart this week calling for the abolition of the one China policy, meaning Taiwan is not part of China anymore, and that's enough to provoke China into a war that the United States will not win. Remember, the Biden administration's policy on this is there's a one China policy. So here he is saying that there's now no one China policy anymore. Listen.
We have this policy of strategic ambiguity, which has served us well for the last 30 years. But I wonder if it's not time for us to declare another policy, a new policy, and that is we will defend Taiwan. It's pretty clear the president seems to think that. And I think if we're going to deter, again, understanding the need for strategic ambiguity before, but times are different now. If we're going to deter, I think we have to be clear in saying, yes, we will defend Taiwan militarily if we have to. Director, am I wrong? And has there been a change in the administration's policy regarding ambiguity?
So
I mean, let's just do that, no matter the cost.
Let's just blow it all up. Let's just blow it all up.
Maybe somebody can help me out on this. But deter China from what? What is in that? Like, we need to deter China. Deter China from doing what? They're not invading. They're not like
taking over economically. Taking over economically. Yeah. That's what we're trying to deter them from, is taking over the U.S. dollar hegemony. Although they won't come right out and say it, that's exactly. So they keep trying to pretend that China is trying to invade different places, which is not happening.
Right. And the Wall Street Journal over the weekend published a headline that I was like, are they kidding with this? How Beijing boxed America out of the South China Sea, as if America had some kind of right to be there. And they built bases that we otherwise wanted, even though the Monroe Doctrine prevents other countries from sort of surrounding the central United States. I don't know, this sort of assumption that we wanted to be there and they did not let us in their part of the world.
In their backyard. Right. It's absurd. Caitlin Johnstone continues, and she brings up probably the most important point of this whole thing, which is that the United States is admitting that we would commit troops to a war with China. President Biden said this. Remember that he said this in that recent 60 Minutes interview where the U.S. would send troops to defend Taiwan.
Yes.
U.S. men and women would go to Taiwan to fight China. He said that. And she points out in her piece, quote, a direct war between nuclear powers. The U.S. war machine is making it more and more explicit that its position on Taiwan is very different from its position on Ukraine, in that it will directly commit American troops to fighting a hot war with China over Taiwan. This is especially concerning because U.S. military encirclement and provocations with Taiwan are making that war more and more likely, in the same way Western provocations made the war in Ukraine more likely.
Although in Ukraine, the United States has resisted putting boots on the ground, or at least admitting to direct involvement.
Exactly.
In this case, I'm sure Zelensky is very jealous that he's like, wait a minute, you'd put troops there, but you won't come here? What did I do?
And of course, we've always said since the beginning of this war in Ukraine that the real story is China.
Sure.
Right? That this is just this is a playground. It's it's preschool.
CBS never did a simulation of a war with the U.S. and Ukraine. They did it in China. That whole, remember that?
Yeah. Meet the Press did their whole war simulation with China. How it would tabletop exercise. We have a group of experts on the show today to run a fake simulation with war with China. Like, really? NBC? Okay, thank you for that. We got our top experts, our military and intelligence state experts on TV to run this exercise. So let's add in nuclear submarines on all of this now, because the United States yesterday officially announced that it's going to deliver its first round of nuclear submarines to Australia to encircle China, part of the AUKUS deal, the AUKUS, which just means Australia, UK, US. Is that an acronym or an initialism?
It's an acronym. Because you couldn't pronounce it.
AUKUS. So part of the plan is to encircle China, and one of the ways that you do that is by arming Australia to the teeth with American weapons, nuclear submarines. And here's Biden's announcement on the AUKUS plan yesterday in San Diego with the British Prime Minister there, Rishi Sunak, and the Australian Prime Minister as well. Watch.
AUKUS has one overriding objective: to enhance the stability of the Indo-Pacific amid rapidly shifting global dynamics. In this first project is only beginning. More partnerships, more potential, more peace and security in the region lies ahead. Simply stated, we're putting ourselves in the strongest possible position to navigate the challenges of today and tomorrow.
So we're putting
peace through weapons. Got that?
We're putting ourselves in the strongest possible position through weapons.
Yeah, that brings peace.
So,
I mean, I would argue that the strongest possible position would be to get the hell out of all these other countries and stop provoking freaking everybody on the planet. You know what I mean? Like, that to me
there
seems
you
like it
go
would
with
be
your
the
extremists.
strongest.
yeah, you're extremist.
I know, I'm an extreme pacifist.
Well, I mean, yesterday on the show, we talked about the decline of the U.S. dollar and the rise of the BRICS nations and the rise of people, these countries leaving the U.S. dollar, right? Moving towards a Chinese yuan, moving towards moving away from the U.S. dollar. Which
the New York Times says demonstrates that you can have hegemony through financial power instead of through war power, which is the way it seems that China wants to exert its influence through an economy, through a Chinese-based economy. The United States, because the dollar is collapsing, because the dollar is weak, and because the dollar doesn't exist in the way that it's traded, which we covered in the previous segment, needs to use guns instead.
Right.
And so if you have, sort of like a wealthier economy where the currency exists versus a wealthy economy where the currency doesn't, you have to have guns to support that, is
the threat.
Is the theory.
Yeah,
here.
It makes a lot of sense.
Right. And so Philip, again, going all extremist on us to say,
right,
let's not bomb and kill, but then how do you
Such
maintain
an isolationist.
Yeah. How do you maintain a hegemony then?
Well, you do it with.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's the point is why do we feel like, because I mean they're provoking this war with China, right? And so in doing so, like, we know that our military recruitment is way down. We're
Yes.
talking about, we've run out of ammunition because we're sending all of our excess to Ukraine. And then, like, in that situation where we know that we don't have the strength to do it, is this just bravado? Or, like, how do they figure they're actually going to, let's say they succeed, they provoke China into a hot war, what the hell are we going to do then?
Right,
that
and
brings
so
up the, like,
can I
waking
just-
a sleeping dragon thing.
So
Go ahead,
then,
sorry.
the can I just push you on the answer then? Because how do you maintain a hegemony if if you can't back up your currency and you can't back up your military? Are you saying then you don't? We let the hegemony go and be peaceful?
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Okay.
that's an extreme position, but yes,
Yeah.
that is kind of my take.
Like that.
Well, because we know we would lose a war with China without a doubt. So they could absorb everything we would throw at them. If we're going to go try to attack the Chinese mainland, are you crazy? We'd have to literally travel thousands of miles and attack the Chinese mainland. It would be a disaster.
How do we get the gas to get there?
It would be an absolute disaster. So, this is not something that we can do. And we would have to then, of course, so this is all about provocation in order to drive people away from the Chinese yuan. It's about encircling them. It's about trying to make sure that they are not actively a part of this process. It would make sure that they are not actively other people are not trading with China. And so China responds go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of people seem to forget how much invested China is in our economy. Like,
Yes.
they are heavily invested in our economy. And imagine if we go to a hot war, they just cut us off. Like, that in itself would hurt us more than weapons.
Right. Exactly. And so they would shut us off from all of the cheap televisions and all of the things that we want delivered to our front doors. Like, they would shut all of that down. And the manufacturing, of course, would absolutely be crushing. So this is like literally the death throes of the US dollar right now. So China says the AUKUS submarines deal embarks on a path of error and danger. So China responded to this. Beijing accusing the U.S., the U.K., and Australia of disregarding global concerns with the plan to build nuclear-powered vessels. And Indonesia also responding. So Indonesia has a partnership, of course, and a strategic treaty with Australia that they are not allowed to do this. So what the hell are you getting nuclear submarines from the United States? Indonesia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs writes, Indonesia has been closely following the security partnership of AUKUS, particularly the announcement on the pathway to achieve AUKUS critical capability. Maintaining peace and stability, they say in the next one, in the region is the responsibility of all countries. It's critical for all countries to be a part of this effort. Indonesia expects Australia to remain consistent in fulfilling its obligations under the NPT and IAEA safeguards, as well as to develop with the IAEA a verification mechanism that is effective, transparent, and non-discriminatory. So
You're not supposed to have done this, is
Right.
what they're saying. So what?
Indonesia is basically saying, you know that agreement we have on not bringing nuclear to our back door? You just violated that with this agreement, showing up with President Biden. And what does this agreement then mean for us? You're going to bring nuclear weapons into Australia and nuclear submarines? This is a violation of our agreement.
I don't know. They're going to do it anyway.
Has the U.S. ever held up an agreement? I mean, at this point, shouldn't everyone in the world know that they shouldn't be making agreements with us because we never stand by them?
Well, but this is Australia violating their agreement.
With Indonesia. Like, we violate it all the time, but this is Australia.
Right, but I mean, they're kind of like a extension of us, basically.
Right, yeah, they're a proxy of, Australia is just an extension of what the United States is. Like, Australia is our utopia, is the United States' version. Like, if we could create like an
authoritarian paradise.
Authoritarian paradise, like
Yeah,
what?
it's like a mini-me.
Exactly. That's exactly what Australia has become, unfortunately. We hear from a lot of our Australian viewers, unfortunately, they say like you can't even get proper news there anymore. It's just awful. And my heart goes out to you for the authoritarianism that you're experiencing there. So the mainstream media is helping to create this China fear and get us ready for war. Just look at these headlines over the past few hours. China shooting lasers at Hawaii so they can measure the island for a Pearl Harbor style attack using green lasers. Chinese satellites are gathering intel for a Pearl Harbor style hypersonic missile attack. And they even have handy charts here to show us exactly what they're doing with these green lasers. Really? Okay. False flag, anybody? False flag attack? Are we going to be as prepared as we were during World War II when we knew what was going on in Pearl Harbor before Pearl Harbor actually happened?
Freaking
I was wondering what all
laser
those lights
beams.
were coming off the bottom of those balloons.
Right. First it was balloons, and now it's laser beams.
Well, and cranes. We've got cranes too. Remember?
Oh yeah, the
In
cranes.
the loading
yeah.
dock.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The shipping docks.
So some in Europe are finally doing the smart thing and saying perhaps that we should not align ourselves with the United States on this. Former French ambassador to the United States today issued a statement. This is Gerard Araud, says it's imperative that the EU defines its own policy towards China. It has no reason to align itself with that of the United States. Good.
That does seem to be the appetite for the attitude around China, especially where we live in Portugal, because when the United States, the former ambassador under Trump to Lisbon and to Portugal had published an article saying that Portugal needs to push back against Chinese investment, the national response to that was the United States needs to not tell us what to do about China.
Right.
And so there definitely is an appetite for let's not partner up on anti-China rhetoric in Europe with the United States. Let's let them do that on their own.
We'll see.
How much that, because that's not the attitude for a Russian response. Europe wants to align itself with the U.S. around Russia and anti-Russian sentiment. But it seems like around China, there's a different attitude, and I wonder why.
I don't know. And then finally, today, we're learning that China, Xi Jinping is going to be speaking with Zelensky for the very first time since the start of the Ukraine war. So,
To which the U.S. may go cut some phone lines if they're willing to blow up some Nord Stream pipelines. Maybe they're going to cut some phone lines to prevent that from happening.
Well, why? Because maybe he'll broker peace. Maybe there'll actually be peace. Can you imagine how much that would be stick in the craw of the United States if he brokers peace between Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah.
It would totally undermine everything that NATO and the United States is trying to do right now. And he knows it. He absolutely knows it.
It's like all good things happening to your ex. They do not want to see that.
I hadn't thought about it that way. So that's that's our China story, and that's we'll keep our eye on this. But the rhetoric is hot, and it continues. So while you're watching your money right now in the banking system, they're ramping up this hot war with China. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.